Okay, here's a look at what I'll be doing today. I'm going to make it so you can equip multiple weapons from different locations and enter into different stances. So it's a little bit of a addition to the earlier equipping video. So if this is something you'd like to do, let's go ahead. Okay, so here's a look at the equip weapon function. In case you haven't looked at that video, you can just pause this and copy it here. Those variables are a soft actor reference, not a name. So it's a soft actor reference. If you see that pink, it's not a name or text. Just keep that in mind. So you would choose the actor variable, and then there's an option for a soft reference. So in this one, we're going to use a spine socket rather than the hand socket. So just go ahead and find, I'm using spine 4, right click that and add socket. We don't need to mess with the location because that is what our weapon map variable does. I got that code from Native Coder. So check out his videos, or you can check out the video where I implement it as well, because I add some stuff to it. If you're following along, you see that I have a different weapon child class, and I have a separate sheath weapon variable than my weapon variable. That is not necessary. When I started the tutorial, I thought it might be necessary as far as moving from one to another, but it was not. So you can keep your weapon child class and your weapons variable just the same. We're going to change the transform location to be resting on the back rather than the hand. And we'll play with the rotation too. Okay, so we want to change the parent socket from the hand one we were using in the previous video to the new socket we added on the spine. So mine is weapon rest. And then I'm going to change the animation real quick to the the grabbing of the weapon, just so I have an idea of where to kind of rotate the sword to. Um, you know, that way it'll have a good resting position. And so once you got that, we will go ahead and copy that transform to our old weapon transform. Okay, so now we have this new location, so we want to make sure we're updating our old weapon map with this new location and new rotation. Okay, so just make sure you do that for both the location and the location. Copy and paste those. You can hold shift and right click to copy, and shift left click to paste. All right, and make sure you set your character back to the animation blueprint and reset the sheath weapon location to 0 and the rotation to 0. All right, and make sure we're making our animations into montages, because we're going to be making montages, and make sure the default group is one that is not using legs, because there will be some sliding on the animation. So I'm using my upper body slot. Okay, and then in these animations, just like in the first video, we want to make sure we find a good location to add a notify to draw the weapon. So just make sure you do that. So since I'm using UI to do the equipping, I need to get this fighting stance out of this function and into the UI. So to do that, I am going to add a return node, and I'm just gonna delete this set, and I'm gonna plug this new fighting stance into this return node so we can send this fighting stance out. That way when we're clicking on the UI to equip the weapon, it's gonna know which fighting stance to use. Okay, and then we want to make sure we reconnect this right here. So we don't need to set the fighting stance inside here anymore. We're doing that inside the UI. So inside our sandbox character, let's go ahead and create a new custom event and call it something like draw weapon. And we're going to add an input, and it's going to be that fighting stance. And this is going to grab that fighting stance. So just go ahead and choose that enumeration and name it, a new fighting stance. All right, and from that, we're going to promote that to a variable, and we'll call it new fighting stance. And we're going to do another custom event, and we're going to call it change weapon slot. And this is the custom event that's going to swap from the back rest to the hand. Okay, so drag the weapon child class that you're working with into the map, and we want to attach component to component. So we want to drag the mesh out because that's the parent, and the socket name is going to be the old hand socket that we were working with from the previous video. So, and if you don't have one, you can just find the bone and right click and add socket. But copy that socket name, you can hit F2 and that will automatically select it all, and then paste that into the socket name here. And the location rule we're actually going to change to keep world, and same for the rotation and scale, you know. And then we're going to drag our new fighting stance out into the event graph, and then we're going to set our fighting stance to this new fighting stance. Okay, so if that equipment function set out a one-handed fighting stance, this is going to know what it is. All right, so we're going into the UI now, and we need to call that draw weapon custom event that we just created. And we're going to plug our new fighting stance from our UI into that custom event. Mine is named equipment_W. This is the button widget that we created that the inventory widget uses. Okay, so from the sandbox character reference and the equipment, we need to draw weapon custom event that we just created and drag the fighting stance from the equip weapon function into that pin. And then in the sandbox character animation blueprint, we want to find that draw weapon notify that we created, and we just want to get our sandbox character, and same thing, we want to find that draw or change. We're going to change weapon slot custom event. All right, that's the one that switched from the weapon rest slot to the hand rest slot. And this just shows that that's working. Okay, now we want to make sure we have that rest weapon notify for the rest weapon animation. And you want to make sure you have a animation montage for that animation as well. So back in the sandbox character, we want to create a rest weapon custom event. So let's go ahead and do that. And we're going to copy and paste this code that we use for the draw weapon. We're just going to reverse it a little bit. We're going to go to the weapon backrest slot rather than the hand. So copy that name, and let's go ahead and paste it in for the socket name, and the attach component to a component. And now we want to get our weapon variable, and we want to get the value because we want to get the location. We want to find the location to put this when we rest it. So we want to get a copy, and this will just be for index 0 for now. I will later on we'll show how to get the index into there. We want from the values, we want to set the fighting stance to neutral because we're not in a fighting stance anymore. And now we're going to do the timer by event.
Hold on to your butts.
This is, rather than using a delay, we're going to do a timer by event. So on the time, we're going to make it loop, and we're going to put 0.01. So this is going to fire every 0.01 seconds. Let me just say what I'm doing here. I'm using a Tinterp node, and that creates a smooth transition from one transform to another. And I'm using the timer by event to allow that transition to take place. So every 0.01 second, it's trying to do this Tinterp, and I'm going to check over before it fires it. I'm wanting to check if it's at the location that I want it to be at, and if it's not, I want it to continue to interpret to that transform, if that makes sense. And if it is at the location that I want it to be at, then we will clear the timer and move out of this timer by event. So let's create that custom event. Right click custom event and name it something like rest weapon Tinterp custom event. And from there, let's get that branch. And let's go ahead and drag this copy of this value that's giving us a transform, and we want to, from that transfer pin, we want to see if it's nearly equal, right? If it's nearly equal to the location that we want it to get to. And from this return value, if it is, we will do clear and invalidate timer by handle. And we want to disconnect that from the timer by event and connect it to the true branch. All right, and let's pull our weapon child class into the event graph and get relative transform. That's where it's at right now. And we're going to set these values to 0.1. So if it's within 0.1 of that transform, it will stop. And from this get random, we want to get a Tinterp. So we're going to go from our current location, where our weapon is currently at, to where we want to rest it at. All right, and so we want to set the relative transform for this shared weapon. We want that to be the Tinterp return value. All right, and we'll plug the false into that. So if it's false, if it's not at the location we want it to be at, then we'll plug it into there. And for the delta time, we want to get world delta seconds. And then for our interp speed, we can put something like 5. So the get world delta seconds is just a way to constantly call this tinterp for every delta second. Okay, so now back in our sandbox APB, we want to also call this rest weapon event we just created, our custom event, and we want to have it call when that rest weapon notify fires inside of that montage. Okay, so now we will figure out how to get to this. We are going to update this the same way we updated the fighting stance here inside of our UI. So inside of the equip weapon function in our sandbox character, when we're outputting that weapon stance, we're just going to output the weapon index as well, because this function uses a weapon index, and we'll just call that weapon index. That is the input of this function. You see it's an input, so we can right click and search for that input, and then we can plug it into the return, and that'll output it. So in this draw weapon custom event that we created in our sandbox character, we want to add another input, which will be an integer, which is just going to be the weapon index, right? And the weapon index is what's telling us what weapon it is, and so that's how we know which fighting stance to play as well. It's all in that equip weapon function that we created in an earlier video. Okay, so we want to promote that to a variable, and then get that variable, and then plug that right into this copy. And so now it will be getting the index of the correct weapon, and we want to go back into the UI and connect that equip weapon to the draw weapon for that. Okay, and now we want to create an input, so we can, when we actually have the weapon on our back, we can draw it. So right click jump, create an input, add a mapping, and then choose the input we just created. We copied jump because that's a digital boolean and not an axis, right? So we want to create a new variable to see if our weapon's out. Did we bring our weapon out? Is it on our back? Weapon out is actually a bad name for this variable. I left it in here because it gave me a moment to actually talk about the importance of naming variables. Weapon out is such a general term. It could mean, is it out where? On my back, in my hand? So what I said at the very end is it out? Is it on our back? On the back is a much better name for this variable. Is weapon on back? You know, because that's very clear. And we'll see later on in this video, this naming gives me issues. That's what it's, is it on our back? Not if it, is it equipped? Is it on our back? Okay, and if it is, well, we're going inside the equip weapon function. If we're equipping a weapon, we're going to set it to true, and if we're not, if we're unequipping the weapon, then we're going to set it to false. I'm struggling saying equip because we're not technically equipping it to our hand. I mean, we're equipping it to our back, so it might be a little confusing when I say equip here. I'm going to say equip when it's going onto our back, and I'm going to say draw when it's actually going to our hand. And really, I made this so that you can't just grab for a weapon if you don't have something on your back. Because if you don't do that, then you can just grab when nothing's there. See, if I unconnect that, you see he'll just grab. So we connect this, and he won't just grab at empty space. He'll only grab if there's a weapon back there. All right, so now we want to call this draw weapon input that we created. And we only want to do it if the weapon's out, right? So we do a branch and connect that. And if the weapon is out, if it's true, we want to create a new variable. And here I'm saying equipped. Let's name it, you should probably name it drawn for just so it's not confusing. So from that, we'll say if the weapon is not drawn, then we will do a branch. Okay, so if the weapon is not drawn, then we want to draw it. So we will set it weapon equipped or weapon drawn to true. And if it's false, we will set it to false. All right. And then from that, we'll play our draw weapon montage. If our weapon is not drawn, we will play our drawn weapon montage. And if it is drawn, we will play our sheath weapon montage. All right. So if you didn't create the montage from here, do it now. Right. And I make sure I have mine set to the upper slot so I don't have my leg slide, because on my upper slot I am negating my thighs. Okay, and make sure you have that inserted into that anim montage. And I also, if you're following along, I have a video where you get caught. You can add that here too. You don't draw it if you're caught. Okay. You can see there's no snapping, right? Because that Tinterp is making it very smooth when he's resting it. All right, and so now if we want to do it based on the weapon index, we need to switch on int, right? So then we switch on int, and we will play an animation based on our current weapon index, right? And so if our mace, for example, is a different location, then we're going to play a different animation that's grabbing to that different location. I don't know how these weapon equipped and weapon or weapon drawn, if that's one, it should go before this switch on int. I don't know how they got at the end, because I put them in the front, but that set of weapon equipped goes before the switch on int. All right, so we want to do the same thing for our false branch. We're going to do the switch on int as well. So we will sheath it to the location based on the index that we're working with. And just make sure you have the right animations in there. Now this is all dependent on if you have animations to grab at different locations and things like that. So this creates an issue where if you have a weapon drawn and in your hand, and then you open the weapon UI to change a weapon, if you select a different weapon, it will just start floating in the air randomly. So to fix that, when I have a weapon drawn and in my hand and I try to open the equipped weapon, I'm just going to have them sheath the weapon they currently have. That was the easiest fix for me. You might want to try a different fix, but the way I figured it is if you have your weapon in your hand and you're opening the equipped weapon window, then you're most likely wanting to change your weapon anyway, so I'm going to just have them sheath it right there. So in that draw weapon code we just created, we want to create a custom event around where we're sheathing it. So custom event, and we can name it something like sheath from UI, because just basically describe what we're doing. We're resting the weapon directly from our UI when this is happening, and we want to plug that into the switch on int. This will essentially call when we already have a weapon in our hand, right? When we're using this and we already have a weapon in our hand, it'll call this, all right? So we want to delay for the duration of the montage. And then when that montage is over, when we're done sheathing it, then we'll pull up that window to where we can change our weapon. All right, and from there, we're gonna do, is our weapon drawn? Is it in our hand? And connect that. And if it is in our hand, we won't do that. If it's not in our hand, we're gonna call our window like normal, or open it like normal. But if it is, we're gonna call that custom event that we just created here, and then we will set the weapon to not be drawn, not be in our hand. Okay. All right, and so now you press it, and then it opens the weapon, the window. Okay. You draw it. You open the window. You sheath it first. Okay. All right, and we'll just show you what happens if you don't do that. All right, now you got a floating weapon, friend, and who knows, you can create a whole character with that and create an input that makes that thing swing independent of you. There you go. That's the bonus for this video. All right, well, thanks for stopping by. If you have any questions, let me know. I know it was a little confusing with the weapon drawn, weapon equipped variable. I'm sorry about that. I just had it all filmed before I just started stressing about that. So anyways, sorry about that. If you have any questions, again, let me know. Otherwise, I will see you next time. Thanks for stopping by. Take care. And here's how I fiddled with the animations. Originally, I put this in the video throughout it, kind of in sequence. But I just figured I did this in the previous video. You guys have seen me animate enough. I didn't want it to kind of get in the way of what we were really trying to achieve in this video. But if you do want to see how I animated or fixed the animations, just watch here. On this, I decided to use the control rig just because I like to use the control rig personally. It makes the arm movement look a little bit more natural to me. Just keep in mind when you are doing this, when you're baking it to the control rig, remember to reduce the keys. Otherwise, it's going to key that arm FKIK. Where we're wanting to switch that to be an IK rather than doing an FK. If you don't reduce the keys, it's going to key that as false for the whole duration of the animation. And it's not necessarily hard to go in there and delete those once they are keyed, because you can open up that little graph right there next to the 30 FPS. If you click on that, when you have the object, you want to look at the keys that are being used. So in my case, the RFIK. If you clicked on that graph, once that is selected, it will show you all those keys, and then you can delete them. But if you don't want it to do that, you can just choose reduce keys at the onset of when you're baking it to the control rig, and it won't have any of those in there. I wish I would have opened up the graph to show you in this video, but I didn't. But it's right next to the 30 FPS. That's that little squiggly line. If you click on that, that opens up your key graph for like everything that you can key in this animation. So in this case, it will have a key for every control, essentially. Just something to keep in mind. Say you're doing a normal animation sequence and you're wanting it to be a cutscene or something like that, and so you're editing the control rig to edit the animation for the sequence, and then you save it, and then you try to package it, and your package fails for whatever reason. That did happen to me. This CB UEFN body, like these control rigs, when you're editing them and once you're done and you're ready to bake it to the animation, and say you did bake it to an animation, you need to put that animation in here and then delete this CBUEFN body and all that, delete that, and then only have the animation in there, and that will allow you to package. At least in my case, it did. It has something to do with I don't know why it doesn't package when the control rig is in there. I couldn't tell you. All I know is that when you remove it and then put in the bake animation sequence, that it does package.